Welcome to Together We Rise. This season, titled For the Parents We Are and the Kids They'll Be, we'll explore the joys, challenges, and transformative power of parenting, one honest conversation at a time.
Whether you're here to gain tools, share a laugh, or find reassurance, this is a space where imperfection is celebrated, connection is nurtured, and growth is always possible.
Each episode dives into topics that matter, from embracing the messy reality of parenting to fostering resilience, self-worth, and authentic relationships.
Together, we'll uncover practical insights, powerful stories, and the heart of what it means to parent with intention.
So, take a deep breath, settle in, and join us as we navigate this beautiful, complicated journey. One step,
one story,
and one lesson at a time. Welcome back to another episode of Together We Rise. With you here today is Tonya,
Maggie,
and Amy.
Today we're going to explore the topic of kids, society, and self-worth, where we're going to explore all the hard conversations and tough topics around how we develop kids' sense of self, navigating the tough waters of everyday life.
Yeah, you know, Tonya, one of the things that I was thinking about in preparation for this topic is just how critical the world is, especially for kids. There's just a lot of criticism coming at kids from lots of different angles, and so thinking about how, as parents, we really need to be intentional in creating and fostering a sense of self-worth so that kids have the tools and the skills that they need to navigate those waters.
Yeah. You know, when you talk about that, I think about even how kids start to develop worth of others, like talking negatively about others, you know, or they see, oh, my friends don't like this team, that team is trash, you know, just like the language we start to use. And even in thinking about how I talk about others is also going to influence the narrative and how I talk about myself.
From a pretty young age, kids are involved in like activities now, like from a very young age, like extracurricular activities. And so they already from a super young age develop this idea of, oh, I'm good at this or I'm not good at this, and therefore that changes my sense of self-worth. That I'm just not sure that we had to navigate in the same way that kids do now, and so their self-worth kind of becomes attached to something that they are good at, that is kind of external, that's not intrinsic to who they are as a person, if that makes sense.
This is something we're dealing with in our house currently, right? Because as you said, Amy, like from a really young age, you're involved in a lot of things, and there's club teams that start like literally first, second grade now, right? And we see on the club teams that everyone has different skill levels. Every kid develops differently. And so you see a lot of kids who maybe get lots of playing time, some kids who don't. And I see the kids who don't and their faces and the narrative that may start to shape in their mind. How do we have conversations with our kids in regards to that? Both on the end in which maybe they're the top notch and how they're treating their peers and their teammates, as well as if they're the kid who's sitting the bench in second grade and they don't have that internal ability to navigate what that might mean.
Every parent that I talk to is struggling with how to navigate this, truthfully. It's really challenging.
Yeah.
And so certainly it starts at home and the conversations that you have at home and helping them develop worth outside of just those things, right? How they contribute to their family, to their school, to their friendships, to all the ways that they are who they are and how that matters. But secondly, I think it's just really important for parents to just stay grounded in this and have perspective in this, that just because a child is quote unquote good at basketball when they're in second grade really means nothing about when they're 15 or 16. I mean, there's 100 different things that could happen with kids. And to just, because I think I see sometimes parents getting really caught up in this as well, and really kids just need to feel from their parents, we're just so happy that you're giving your best effort and that you're trying. It's hard though, and it's hard as they get older because it's hard to have those conversations to figure out, well, yeah, you really didn't give your best effort, so how do we handle that, you know? And so I think it's just really important for parents to have conversations, to think about how are we talking about this and how are we helping kids understand that this is about more than just them playing a sport or music or whatever it might be.
I love that you talked about like identifying the things that make that kid like worthy in lots of different ways, right? Like how you are as a friend, how you are as a sibling, how you are as a neighbor, like all of these different ways that kids can identify a sense of self-worth, that as long as there's a lot of different facets for how they're identifying that, it doesn't have to hang on one thing. For me, if I have to be good at basketball for me to have self-worth, no, I can be good at all these other things, or I can have like these other areas where I give or that I contribute to that make me feel that sense of worth.
And I think naturally we compare ourselves to other people. We care about wins and losses, and all those things are influencing my self-esteem, my self-worth, how I feel about myself at a really, really young age. Like, I was in sports growing up, but I didn't have to think about those things until middle high school. And so to think that kids are having to challenge themselves in some of these ways when their brain is still really young, and I think it requires parents to be really intentional about these conversations.
There's a lot of ways to contribute to different teams, sports, theater, music, whatever it is. Like, you don't necessarily have to be the star player to be a really important part of your team. And so I think if you can find ways to celebrate those things, I really appreciate when you say, like, were you a good teammate? Did you support your team? Even if you were feeling disappointed about that you weren't getting to play, or maybe you weren't playing your best or whatever, were you still a good supportive team? Were you still following directions from your coach? Were you still having a positive attitude? All those things that are super important to not just sports, of course, but all the different types of activities that kids can be involved in these days.
How do you balance this growth in their brain of like perspective taking, setting realistic goals, while also cultivating like you're courageous and you can do really hard things throughout your life?
The images that they see on TV and social media are really influencing what they think it means to be an athlete, or what they think it means, to be popular, right?
Yes.
And how those images aren't necessarily the healthiest image, or even the most realistic. Wanting to encourage and foster, like, you can be really, really great, and sometimes great means that you're a great teammate. Sometimes great means that you are really supportive, right? Like, there are different things that we try to give that value of greatness to, but it is really hard because we're fighting against a lot of images externally from our family.
Because what is getting portrayed and what these kids are seeing at a really young age are not realistic. Like, I have kids now who are like, if you would just let me upload my videos on YouTube, I'd be famous and I'd be rich, right?
I mean, I think that you have to set boundaries around it. It is hard, it is challenging, especially because kids are, oh, but my friend gets to do X, Y, and Z, and my friend has a phone, how come I can't have a phone, or whatever the issues are. And I think you have to, as a family unit, decide what are our boundaries around this, how are we going to set limits on this, and how are the adults also going to set boundaries and limits around this. But then also just being aware of what are your kids viewing? What is the content that they're looking at? Because you can go down some deep rabbit holes of like, whoa, where did that come from? I'm just a big believer, and I want to know what my kids are watching so that I can then have conversations with them about it.
Yeah, that message of like, well, my friends get to. Oh my God. I hear that all the time, like, as it relates to screens, video games, all of those things. But I mean, we have to acknowledge that kids' brains are not yet ready for what is on social media, what is on the internet, and that it does require those boundary settings, because kids cannot differentiate between this person is famous on YouTube and I could do that same thing, versus what that actually takes to be famous on YouTube and what you have to give of yourself and give of your life. Like, so it's just the boundary setting and helping kids because they do not have the capacity yet.
And I'm curious how you guys navigate this connected to the self-identity kids are starting to have at a really young age.
Yeah, that's a big question. And I don't know that we totally know, honestly, all the effects of this. I think it's really important to have these conversations and to, again, help kids develop those sense of self-worth, that sense of validation outside of even that, and just really helping them understand the things that they are viewing, for the most part, are curated, are edited, it took maybe 100 pictures to get that one picture. That not all the things that they're seeing are real or attainable, frankly. And so the idea of even beauty and success and all the things that they see, I think exposing them to lots of different types of people and situations so that they can see there's like 1,000 ways to be beautiful, quote unquote beautiful. There's 1,000 ways to be quote unquote successful. But it's really hard, and I think you have to keep a really good pulse on it as parents to kind of understand how your kid's doing with this and how they're navigating this.
In our family, one of the things we talk about right now, because my oldest is 10, is that you cannot engage with somebody on the internet who you do not know in real life.
Yeah.
At some point that'll change. That rule will change where your circle gets to be wider. But right now when you're 10, your circle doesn't get to be that wide. And really, because we're not really designed as 10-year-old humans to have connections with thousands of people, that's way too overwhelming, way too much for a 10-year-old to manage. That's kind of way too much for adults to manage too sometimes. But thinking about like, how do you create some of those rules and boundaries for your family and for your kids that make sense? For our 10-year-old, that one makes sense. Like, I can engage with people on the internet who I know in real life. And being able to slowly move to like, maybe someday you can have Instagram and you can, connect and engage with people that you don't know in real life, and that's fine, but we want to make sure that you're prepared and understand how to do that in a healthy way.
And outside of self-worth, I mean, this is a safety issue. I mean, we know a family that sort of became YouTube famous. They just sort of happened upon it, and the things they got from adults that were not safe were very scary, and so they had to go to a point where they were, any videos with their kids, they also had to have an adult present with them, and I mean, that's a scary world, and I think kids, you have to manage that too, this protective piece of it, but there are a lot of, scary people that, I have daughters, and so I have a 15-year-old daughter, and so at one point we were kind of looking at her Instagram, and it's like, who are all these people that are trying to follow you? And we had the same exact conversation, like, you cannot have, right now at this point in time, like, you can only be friends with people that you actually know in real life, because you just have to be careful, truthfully, and we want to think the best of people, but there's some scary things happening on the internet for sure.
Something I've reflected on is how we manage this as parents connected to the peer pressure. What other kids are getting that our maybe kids aren't getting. What our kids' perception of what other kids are getting, because I don't actually think other kids necessarily are, but when we're talking like, I get to do this and I get to do that. And then like, related to this is just then the overnights when they may be exposed to it when they do go to their friend's house. We don't play Fortnite in our home, but we have some peer groups that play some Fortnite, and they play it when our kids are spending the night over there, and how I as a parent navigate, okay, we don't have that in our house, but what does that look like when they're at their friend's house? And just that whole concept of peer pressure, because kids want to fit in, they want to be liked, they want to be relatable. How do you guys navigate that?
I think it stays grounded in the self-worth piece, right? That home is a safe place and that we value you exactly who you are. You do have to have conversations about, you're right, that family may have different rules. Here's why we have the rules that we have. And I know that doesn't feel fair to you, but these are the rules that we've established, and we're gonna stick with that, and this is the reason behind that. I think that for whatever reason, my kids feel pretty confident and don't seem to have, at least my oldest child doesn't seem to have this sense of FOMO, I guess, that we call. I'm not sure truthfully where that came from, but I like to think that there was something about the way that we supported her and parented her that allowed her to feel that way and to feel convicted in her decisions. Now my other kids are a little bit younger, so we'll see how that goes. But so I think it does start really from a sense of home and feeling safe at home and feeling connected and worthy and all the things at home.
I'll hear a lot from my oldest, who just wants to play video games. Like, that's all he wants to do. Is, my friends get to play video games all the time. Every day they play video games, 3 hours a day. Again, like perceptions, I'm not so sure that that's actually true, but it probably feels like that for him. And talking about, the way that we value things in our home might be different than the way that somebody else values things, and that's okay. You might get to do things that your friend does not get to do because of the way that we set our rules. But I think that helps to make some distinctions between how different households might do things differently, and that doesn't make one bad or wrong or, better than, because again, then it helps make a distinction and differentiate between who I am and who my friends are, right? They come from different places, they've had different rules, and so I might make different choices from my friends when I'm older because I've had different rules.
How do you balance then the honesty part of it? Because I think self-worth also comes from, I can be honest and authentic about things. And so we've talked a lot about, okay, I go to my friend's house, they have Fortnite, but we don't want to cultivate lies around this. Like, if you're at their house, their rules, you can play Fortnite, and I am flexible to say you can play Fortnite at their house, but we're not gonna have it at our house. And part of that is because I don't want you to go there and feel shame around playing it, or that you have to lie to me about it. But I don't know that that was the right move. I don't know how to necessarily navigate that.
I mean, in the background of all this is, sitting with your own self or your partner of saying, okay, what do we think about this? Like, how do we have these conversations? Because sometimes, a kid will ask a question, or I want to do this, or can I do this? Their favorite thing to do is to text and say, can I do this? Maybe when they've already decided and planned that they're going to do that, And so in the background of all that is really sitting with your own values and sitting with your partner's values and saying, okay, how do we want to navigate these different things? And sometimes you make a decision that later you're like, I don't know if that was the right decision. So then you have to figure that out, right? Like, okay, do we want to stick with that? Do we want to change this? Because it's constant. It's constant of, oh, I hadn't thought about that yet. How are we going to handle that? Hadn't thought about that yet. It's an ever-evolving world. And the reality is that, at least from my generation, my kids are living a very different life and experience than I did. And so this makes it even harder. Like, I truly didn't have that experience. Like, I truly didn't have, and thank goodness, right? I've heard so many parents say, thank goodness we didn't have cameras at every single party and function we were at. But our kids do. And so how do we help them when we really didn't experience this ourselves is tricky. So tricky.
That's so hard. A lot of what I'm hearing in this conversation goes back to values. Like, I think there's a thread of that, of like, every family has their values, and when we identify our values and we talk about our values and we pull our kids into that, the more that we can help them develop their own values, because your sense of self-worth is guided by your values. And so when we talk about our value in our home is not to play Fortnite, but that's not their value over there. And so it's not our value that you never play Fortnite, it's that that's not a game that you have access to all the time, right? And so there's ways to kind of tie those things back to values that then allow them to feel confident in making their decisions of like, I can play for a little bit over here with these friends, but I just don't get to have access to that all the time.
Yeah, it makes me just think of boundaries, like how we teach kids boundaries. I think boundaries are so interconnected to our self-worth, because when we have boundaries, we can set boundaries because we know our worth, we also then get almost like reconfirmed or feel that sense of efficacy or pride in the fact that like, I'm worthy to have this boundary in place. And so how do you teach kids boundaries?
We haven't touched on this yet in this conversation, but so much of this is modeled through us and how we establish boundaries. Our kids learn how to set boundaries for themselves by us showing them what it looks like to have a boundary. We set boundaries within all of our relationships. And so our kids see that and they learn how to do that in the context of us doing that with them. And so we also have to think about how does our own self-worth play into this, because we can't set boundaries if we don't have our own sense of self-worth either. So it's all like really dependent on us, which is a lot of pressure.
This is tricky. And it's tricky also because I think there are boundaries set and rules, and then it's like, am I being too rigid? Do I be a little flexible in this moment given the needs at place? Or am I just uncomfortable with the emotions, so I'm then being more permissive versus
or am I just tired?
Am I tired? I just don't want to battle this right now.
Right. Yeah. I think when I was thinking about this topic, so much of what you had just mentioned is role modeling, and so much of it is modeling for our kids what we hope they can be and do. And ultimately, you want to grow them to be able to make choices on their own, which may be different than choices that we make ourselves, but that you hope are valued in thought and value and self-worth, and that the choices that they make are ultimately based on the things that they have cultivated and developed themselves. But you're right, it's hard because we have to work really hard at this.
Sometimes our kids have big emotions and they're like, I hate you. You're the worst mom ever, right? But you saying that to me does not like show me that like if I don't set a boundary around that, then I'm not showing that I have the worth to not be called those names. At the same time that I'm trying to hold space for your emotions.
Were you in my house this weekend?
No, but I'm in my own house.
Because literally, one of my children said to me, I came home and our house was such a mess. And I was so frustrated, and I was picking up, and I was like, you either need to go outside or you need to help me pick up. Those are your two choices right now. And the response was, you are the worst mom. And I was not in the space to hear it. And I was mad, and I yelled and said, you never get to play video games ever the rest of your life. Like, the most ridiculous threat. Once I calmed down, I realized that I had to set a boundary with him about what is okay to say to me and how that makes me feel. And that's not something that I've done a ton of yet with my children. Is I've held a lot of space for their feelings, but I am recognizing that I also have to hold space for my feelings and set a boundary and say what's okay for you to say to me and what's not. And so I, after calming down, went and apologized to him for my response, but then told him, when you called me the worst mom ever, that hurt my feelings, and my feelings matter just as much as your feelings matter, because everybody in this house, they matter just as much as any other person.
Yeah.
That is what it is to be a family. And so it's not fair for me to have you say hurtful things, because that's not how we treat our family. And so it is like, that was a step for me in our relationship with my child. And he needed a little bit of time, but then said, like, I'm really sorry I hurt your feelings. So I think all of that goes back to that, like, cultivating a sense of self-worth through modeling and showing people what that looks like.
But I think sometimes I've worried so much about honoring their feelings or their experience that I've unintentionally showed, like, my feelings don't matter. But that's the pressures I think sometimes we put on ourselves as parents. Like, I'll carry all the weight, and sometimes I don't think then we're modeling to kids the equality that happens in relationships or should happen in relationships.
I know we have rules in our house about you can't hurt people physically, and you can't hurt people with your words. And so those are big rules. But you're right, it's so hard because you're like, I know that you are so dysregulated right now, and so these words are just spewing out of your mouth that I know don't really mean anything. However, like you said, it's not okay to say that to your friends, to your teachers, to your siblings, to your boss, all that. So.
And if you do say those things, then you have to repair. Like, you don't get a pass just because I'm mom, or just because dad is dad and we're grown-ups and think we can handle it. Like, you still have to repair with us too. And so it's like, how do we cultivate that? Because I do it so much repair with my kids, because I want them to have a sense of, like, you're worthy enough that I should apologize to you when I mess up. But I have not done a good job of, like, having it come the other way. And I think you say the line is always moving, or where's the line? But I feel like the line is always moving as they grow and develop. And it's like, what now do I ask my 10-year-old to do that I wasn't asking him to do when he was 6 or 7 or 8? And, like, am I caught up in asking the right things and having him reach for the right line?
There's a difference of, like, unconditional love and unconditional tolerance. Like, I unconditionally love you, but I don't have to tolerate some of these things, because the reality is that you're going to be in relationships in life where some people will walk away from the relationship with you if you treat them this way. And I think sometimes we get caught up as parents of, like, I unconditionally love you, so I'm not going to set maybe some of the boundaries around this. But I think then the hard thing is then kids don't necessarily know where are boundaries they can set with people, where they say, well, I'm going to walk away from this friendship, or I'm going to walk away from this peer group who's doing something that I don't agree with. Like, all of this really does come down to self-worth and how I navigate relationships in society and social media.
And so much of that is seen at home, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do we treat each other at home? How do we show them are boundaries, and that yes, that hurts my feelings. And so I think that's okay for kids to hear and see and view and to learn that piece at home so that they can help manage that in those other relationships that they experience outside of our home.
When you think about the worth you want your children to carry into adulthood, what is that?
I think knowing oneself is really important and impactful, because I think that I probably have the most sense of worth and value when I am staying true and genuine to who I am as a person. And that is tough in this world that we live in, when society is telling us be this way, do this, show this, achieve this. But I think staying grounded in what are my values, who am I, who do I want to be, how do I show up in relationships, and how do I show up at work, how do I show up with family, all the things. That's probably when I feel the most worthy, is when I'm staying true to who I am as a person.
That's such a beautiful answer. It's hard to follow that. I think for me, one of the things that I think about is the narrative that my kids are going to have. And I think one of the narratives that I have about myself most of the time is that I am enough. And like, I think for my kids, I don't need them to be exceptional or extraordinary or feel like they, are the greatest. I want them to truly, like, in their core, feel like they are enough just as they are. But I want them to have that sense of, like, that is true of every single human. Because I think when we believe that all humans are enough, the way that we engage in and act with the world is so much kinder and gentler and more beautiful. And if we can reflect that back to ourselves, we are kinder and gentler and more beautiful with ourselves too. So that sense of, like, I am enough.
I hope my kids leave knowing that, like, they can be anything without judgment from me or their father, with absolute unconditional love and support, aligned with our values as a family and their values as individuals, but to truly do that in alignment with their design and who they were born to be. And I think knowing themselves is a way to start to hopefully navigate those waters. Yeah. Okay, ladies, thanks for being here with us today. Thank you guys for tuning in for another episode of Together We Rise.
Next time on Together We Rise.
It does humanize us, and I think that's really important. We're not just their parents, we're actually people that experience these things too, and maybe learn from them.
Thank you for joining us. We hope today's episode left you feeling inspired, encouraged, and maybe even a little lighter.
Remember, resilience isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up, staying curious, and building stronger connections one moment at a time.
If this episode resonated with you, share it with a fellow parent or caregiver who might need the same reminder. Together, we can create a community that uplifts and empowers family everywhere.
Until next time, take care of yourself and your family. And never forget, the small, imperfect steps you take today are shaping the legacy you'll leave for tomorrow.
This series is brought to you by Tanager and the Meraki Institute of Learning. For more information, please visit tanagerplace.org.